look, a turf war.
Actually, we're just talking.
What? Come on, fight each other.
But why? We made up years ago.
I wish I could make any monster fight each other. That's so barbaric. And I wish I could hurt you.
You just did. Ladies, gentlemen, and
monsters of all ages, one question that pops up every once in a while in the community is the classic simple query. What if Monster Hunter had PvP? Well, I've got news for you if you didn't already know, and well, most people clearly don't. Monster Hunter did have PvP. Specifically, this was in Monster Hunter DOS, the second Monster Hunter game ever made, and one that was only released in Japan. Here is the only clip that I can find from that game, a YouTube video from 2006. Yeah, you think about that, 2006, within which you can clearly see two hunters in an arena with two monsters. This isn't necessarily what most people would have pictured when the concept of PvP in Monster Hunter is brought up. It isn't just two hunters hitting each other in the face with their weapons, though quite notably, you could hit, damage, and even feint the other hunter. But that was not the objective of this mode. The objective was quite simply which hunter could kill their opponent's monster faster. If your monster died, you lost. Feinting the other hunter could assist that, obviously, as when a hunter feints in this mode, they are taken out of the fight for about 15 seconds. That is 15 seconds where they aren't hunting your monster and you can freely attack theirs. Sadly, you couldn't control the monster really, you weren't choosing which attacks it used or anything like that, though there were horns that you'd get for this mode in order to buff your monster in various ways. While this PvP mode didn't continue onwards into the further second generation games, or even further than that into the future Monster Hunter games, interestingly, it did also get put into Monster Hunter Frontier, the MMO, another game that never released in the West though. In this game, it was even a bit sillier because of the movesets available to hunters. It allowed the killing of other hunters quite easily, actually. You may be wondering though, how do you pick the monsters that fight for you? Well, specifically, this was related to the capture mechanic that still exists to this day. If you captured a monster in DOS instead of killing it, pretty much anything that wasn't an Elder Dragon, you had a chance to keep it as a pet specifically for usage within this PvP arena. Past that, you could even feed them various items in order to make them stronger the next time that you put them in the arena. For example, Band Legiacris here states that if you gave a Rajang a Kirin horn, it would get more powerful, which of course makes sense to us today, having seen things like the Rajang cutscene in Monster Hunter World, but at the time it was a really big deal and was even the beginning of the rumor that Rajang would go out and hunt Kirin of their own volition. These days the PvP feature is all but gone from Monster Hunter with one exception. There is a specific group of Monster Hunter fans in the community putting in a lot of work to restore Monster Hunter DOS with online servers and everything. Currently it's in a closed beta, and quite recently in fact they actually got the PvP mechanic itself working once again. In other words, keep an eye on that project if this concept is one that interests you. It's also worth noting that there was a 2v2 version of this PvP game mode as well. There would still only be one monster on each side, but you would get two hunters each, and so you could do some neat teamwork shenanigans like having one player focus on the monster while the other one just attacks the other team of hunters. This whole thing is a really interesting concept to me, and well, it blows my mind that it was only around in a couple of Monster Hunter games and never made it to the West. I suppose the main reason for this is that it is far from the main focus of what Monster Hunter is, and development time spent on the PvP makes it harder to do more PvE content. Not to mention that for the PvP mode to function properly, you have to somewhat balance the weapons for use against other hunters as well, rather than just monsters, and Monster Hunter is definitely at its best when the weapons are purely balanced with monsters in mind. That said, now that we've talked about what exactly this mode was, how insane is it that this existed? Did you even know? I mean, from my awareness, the vast majority of hunters have never even known this mechanic ever existed. I didn't know about it until recently myself. Josh didn't even know about it, and he's played Monster Hunter games since the very first one released in the West. In fact, to prove this even further, here is a forum post about Monster Hunter Try, where someone asks if there is PvP in the game. Look at some of these responses. You may be thinking that many people knew about this mechanic, and over the nearly 2 decades since Monster Hunter DOS, the player base is just forgotten, but this forum post is from 2009, only 3 years after the release of DOS. This person says, no, there is not PvP, and thank God, leave PvP for FPS games. Another response, no, because this is Monster Hunter, which is genuinely hilarious to me, knowing full well that 3 years earlier a Monster Hunter game was released that did have a PvP mode. Not some strange side title or anything like that, a genuine mainline Monster Hunter game that had PvP. Someone even mentions arm wrestling as a type of PvP. It's hilarious to me how unknown this game mode actually was, and yet the game mode itself is so genuinely interesting, especially when the concept of whether Monster Hunter should have PvP or not just comes up multiple times a year in some way, shape, or form as a question from someone in the community, and very few people seem to remember that, well, it already did, and it was pretty cool too. Honestly, I quite like this idea for PvP within the game. You can hit the other hunters, but it isn't the main objective by any means. It's simply a fight to see who is better at hunting monsters.
Oh no, the hunter has become the hunter.
From what I can tell, overall, this game mode wasn't overly complex at all. The variety comes from which monsters each player can use, their thought process when it comes to choosing them, and also when it comes to time spent attacking the monster versus attacking the other player, any items used beforehand to buff the monster, and then the usage of the horns within the fight to buff your own monster up for short term. You couldn't tell the monster what to do, it just sort of did its own thing, which brings up two very interesting questions to me. Firstly, should this PvP mode be brought back into the main series in future games like, I don't know, Monster Hunter 6 on the horizon? Would the game benefit from having such a system? Personally, as I mentioned before, I think the main issue with this is the game as a whole is better if the weapons are purely balanced around fighting monsters. But if they do that and still have a PvP mode, some weapons will just be ungodly better at destroying hunters and thus have an innate advantage within this specific game mode. But the second question is, what if we did have PvP return, but it changed how it worked? I mean, there's a really easy way that is quite obvious to me now that I know that it was like this before, to make this both functioning and really fun, and the mechanics are actually already in modern Monster Hunter. Wyvern riding. Through Wyvern riding in Rise and Sunbreak, you full-on control the monster that you're on top of. You get access to a vast majority of its moves that you can choose to use, you aim it yourself, and you control every action that it does, even down to its individual little movements. What if we got a PvP game mode in Monster Hunter 6 that is just Wyvern riding two monsters against each other? Though that would assume that Wyvern riding as a mechanic stays in, which personally I don't really think will happen. That said, who's to say that we couldn't keep the basis of it? By which I mean, treat it like the old system, capture monsters on quests, get a chance at keeping them within your sort of stable, and then a PvP mode where you pit your monster against your opponent's monster. No hunter in the arena. Not literally Wyvern riding them, but you control the monster the same way. You control its movements, you control its attacks with different buttons and directional movements, and you also get the ability to dodge your opponent's attacks. The only real difference between this and Wyvern riding would be visually, honestly, as you aren't physically riding the monster, but instead you just tell it what to do from the viewing stands or something like that. But of course, the actual effect of this would be similar to Wyvern riding. They could give you access to a greater variety of the moveset. They could give you mounted punishers as something that you build up to by dealing damage against the other monster, and then you just unleash it, sort of like an ultimate attack. But if they did this, they wouldn't have to balance hunter weapons for use against players at all, but could still add a really fun PvP game mode to the game.
Fight them hand-to-hand combat.
While for the most part I am on the side that PvP doesn't need to be in a Monster Hunter game, that PvP is not the focus of the games, and not having it doesn't take away from the experience. Mostly when I say that, I'm actually talking about hunter against hunter combat. This version that I'm talking about now, this monster on monster where you're controlling them, I actually think this would be a really fun way to re-implement the system. A system that used to actually exist, even though most hunters have either forgotten about it or never even knew it was there in the first place. But it come back in a modern way, a way that takes advantage of mechanics that we already have in Rise and Sunbreak. They're there. The ability to control the monsters like this is already there, but repurpose this to create an entire side activity within a new Monster Hunter game. I really adore this idea personally. I don't think hunters need to attack hunters. That just doesn't really work in my mind. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But hunters giving monsters commands, telling them what to do as they fight each other, while realistically, if we're looking at it logically, if we're talking about how it would feel from an ecology standpoint as a concept, this is essentially an animal fighting ring, and that is not very morally great for hunters to be doing. As far as an actual game mode within a Monster Hunter game though, I think it would be incredibly fun to do. I love the idea. Realistically, you could even compare this to Monster Hunter Stories 2, which had a PvP game mode as well, and honestly, it worked pretty much the same, but in a turn-based fashion. This would just be that concept, but without turns. An action-based Monster Hunter controlling PvP mode, and I really love the idea. I still can't get over the fact that this actually existed before in the way that it did. It is a really cool idea, and I love that Capcom actually did this back in the day, that they took a risk actually creating this system, but I think it wouldn't hurt the games at all to have it return in some way, and while I don't really think the original way is quite right for today's modern Monster Hunter for the multiple reasons I've already stated, I think the altered version of it, where we just control a monster and fight the opponent's controlled monster, would be a really perfect way to get this done. So that's about it, everyone. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about today. First up, did you even know that there was PvP in a previous Monster Hunter game, a mainline Monster Hunter game? It already existed and it was pretty cool. It probably left due to balancing and development time shifting, but what if it came back? Would it come back in the same way, or could it be changed? Should it be changed? I quite like my idea for a reinvigorated version of the PvP Monster Arena in which it's genuinely just monsters fighting under player control, and I would genuinely love to see that in some form in the future. What do you think? Should PvP in general return to the series? Would an altered version like this be ideal, or do you just want the original concept they did brought back into the modern games? Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.